This year, a book that is of most importance was published by Decenu Publishing House in Romania. This is the book. It is a translation from an English version. This is the English version of the book. It's entitled Political Orthodoxies, the Unorthodoxies of the Church Coerced. Through the book is written for though the book is written for the Orthodox world, its subject is also of interest for all of us because no big denomination has escaped completely from the snare of politics. Its author, arhimandrit Chiril Hovorun, is now with me to discuss about the book. Thank you, Professor Hovorun, for joining me to this discussion.
Thank you for your kind invitation. I'm happy to talk to you.
Professor of Ecclesiology, International Affairs and Ecumenism at University College at Stockholm. Also professor in Sweden, also professor in Loyola Marymount, Los Angeles, United States of America, and Pontifical Gregorian University of Rome. An impressive curriculum vitae, but I'm interested now more in something else. Without further ado, we'll enter into the subject. As a young man, Cyril Hovorun decided to follow a career in theoretical physics. This is a science, a domain that uses mathematics to understand and describe the world. Later on, he decided to shift from this scientific field to another scientific field, the redemption through the cross. He shifted from a career in the world, from the study of creation to the study of the creator, to the study of the recreation of humankind by the cross of Christ. Professor Hovorun, why and how this important change in your life?
Well, thank you for this question that goes back to my early years of my life. Well, it seems to be unnatural to switch from physics, like theoretical physics, to theology in our days, in the era after science became a sort of theology, a sort of religion. But it was very natural for the pre-modern times. As I study antiquity, I realized that it was so natural to move between physics and metaphysics at that time. They were not considered as something radically different from each other, but rather actually evolving one into another. Physics would go into metaphysics and back, metaphysics would come back to physics. So it's the same book of creation that we study, either theologically or scientifically. It's the same ideas which we try to extract from this book. And the more I study theology, the more I study classical theology, the more I realize that there is no barrier, there is no watershed between the two disciplines. They are so much interconnected.
So science has helped you to go near the Bible and near God.
Literally,
not far away.
Literally so, because I actually converted to Christianity, well, to faith, because I was brought up in a non-religious family. I converted to God by reading the excerpts from the Gospels in a scientific magazine. So in the late Soviet period, it was really difficult to have an access to the Bible. So they published pieces of the Bible in the journals, and I read, including scientific journals. So I read one of them, and I believed. So that's how physics literally led me to metaphysics.
Wonderful. Now that you brought this into discussion, as a man who comes from a non-religious background, you met with the church, with the faith. You become a monk, a priest, a professor. You had some expectation from the church, from the faith. How you discover that this profession of faith is not always what people pretend to be and what it should be? It was hard for you to find that, to agree with and to come public with at least this subject about we'll talk immediately. It was hard to discover the problems. It was hard to tell them to public. how were your feelings about this?
Right. Well, I think I experienced something that almost everyone in the church experiences, later or sooner. The experience of the gap between the church of the faith and the church of real life. This experience is also interdenominational, I believe, regardless of what church people belong to. They eventually come to the questions why the church that I live in is not exactly the church I came in, the church that I believe in. So there is a gap, this gap between the church of the faith, of theology, and the church of real life. And some people actually try to ignore the gap, even though they feel that there is one. Some people exaggerate the gap and they leave the church. So I think it is important to reconcile, to build a bridge over this gap, to reconcile our faith with our perception of what is happening in the church, with our experience of the church. And well, that is the main purpose of my ecclesiological project, if you want. I've written some other books, and exactly this issue is at the core of my studies, of my reflections. I explore the church as it evolved through the centuries, with all its fallings and shortcomings. And I explore also the church as it is believed in by the faithful, and I try to demonstrate that it is possible to live with this gap. It is possible to get inspired, from this gap, to affirm one's faith by exploring the difference between the church of faith and the church of experience. Because if the church that has shortcomings survives those shortcomings, survives all those terrible circumstances, historical circumstances, it means that it is a divine institution. It's not just human. It means that it has its strength somewhere, not from this world, but from the world beyond. So I think this is, it's not something that needs to be rejected, this gap, but it's something that needs to be appreciated and can be inspirational for Christians.
May we say that what helped you to overcome the sentiments, the negative sentiments when you see this, was the fact that the church is a divine institution, and always when the human factors intervene, it is always to be for disappearance, because in the end, the Church of God will survive and will win.
Well, actually, the church is not just a divine institution. That is a very important thing. It's both human and divine. It's a combination, synergy between the human and the divine aspects. And this synergy produces an amazing phenomenon of the church. If we believe that the church is just divine, then the incarnation loses its meaning. Then it becomes just an idea for us, not a reality. The incarnation becomes a reality for us only through the church and through the human elements in the church, including Christ's humanity, which remains in the church, and also our humanity, which mixes up with the Christ's humanity in the church. And when there is a human element in the church, because there is a human element in the church often makes mistakes. So mistakes are important for the church. They are inevitable. If there are no mistakes in the church, it means that it's not a real church. Then it's just a fantasy. It's just our idea about the church. The church that demonstrates mistakes demonstrates its fullness, its complete humanity, and its complete unity of its humanity with the divinity in the church. Therefore, for example, I firmly believe that the church not only is allowed to be criticized, but also should be criticized constructively, in a very constructive and faithful way, because that's how we correct the human mistakes in the church. That's how we help God, to guide the church towards salvation.
Okay, thank you very much. Before going further, I would like to urge our viewers that in general, when we speak about the word orthodox in this discussion, even if it is used for the Eastern Orthodox Church, as yours was your intention in regard to the book, I want them to place this word Orthodox not only in the Eastern Orthodox perspective area or world, but also in the Protestant or Catholic, because this subject of politics is not affecting only the Orthodoxy, but also the other, let's say, tradition from Christianity. So our attention goes now to the book, to the title of the book, Political Orthodoxies, the Unorthodoxies of the Church Coerced. Although the title is speak for itself, I would like you to go deeper into the meaning of this title that we read on the cover. Please enlarge the meaning of the title for us.
Well, yes, I first of all agree that the book, even though it is focused primarily on the problems of the Orthodox world, but it can be read also from outside, and that's why it's not a coincidence that the book has been translated by an evangelical publishing house and published by an evangelical publishing house in Romania, even though it was presented for the first time on the Faculty of Orthodox Theology in Cluj-Napoca in September this year, 2023. And I should say that, well, the Orthodox Romanian would have probably some difficulties to accept, to receive this book. And I already received some kind of mixed feedback from the Orthodox, which is, well, this book is not an easy reading. It's not a very much a pious reading, you know. It's a reading that incites people to admit that, yes, there are some mistakes that have been done by the Orthodox and continue to be done by the Orthodox. It's something which is really hard to accept. I think it's easier, certainly for the Protestants, to accept, because the idea of the church being seper reformanda, constantly reforming itself and constantly being in self-reflection, it's easier to digest. But I believe that this idea of the church being seper reformanda is not completely alien for the Orthodox as well. And the church actually is being reformed, even in Orthodoxy, but we don't acknowledge it quite often. The need for correction comes from the idea of the church being coerced, being forced to do something that the church is not supposed to do. Usually this is happening under the duress of the state, under the pressure coming from the state, or from some societal kind of demands, forces. For example, if you take the Russian Orthodox Church, which is being really engaged, I would say, hijacked and misled from the, I think, the purpose of Christianity. The pressure is double. On the one hand, it is the Kremlin, it is the state. On the other hand, it is the society that demands the church to play its social and political role that it tries to play. And this role does not correspond to the role the church is supposed to play as the continuation of God's presence in the world, you know. That's why coercion can be exercised by both the state and some societal demands and forces. The church, yes, and unorthodoxies means this title, subtitle, means something broader than just orthodoxy. Orthodoxy as an identity, because we are distinguishing between orthodoxy as an identity, like we call this is the Orthodox Church, meaning the church of the Byzantine origins, existing and functioning in a traditionally Orthodox society like Romania, for example, country like Romania. It's an identity, but the original meaning of orthodoxy was like a quality, an adjective, meaning that the faith, the way of life are corresponding to the gospel. And when the church, while being orthodox by identity, the church's members deviate from the orthodoxy in the sense of correspondence to the gospel, then we deal with unorthodoxies. And I believe these unorthodoxies apply indeed, as you said, to various Christian groups and confessions. Indeed, they can be identified in the Catholic Church. We could speak about political Catholicity. We could speak about political Protestantism. We could speak about all sorts of confessions being tempted to deviate from its path and to follow the path of politicization, of instrumentalization by political authorities and forces.
In English, in the title, we have the word the unorthodoxies. In Romanian, the title in this part was translated with heresies.
Yeah.
It's something wrong?
Well, I was consulted actually by the translators if it is allowable, if it is permissible to use the word heresies, which does not exist in the English original, and I approved this translation because I believe one could consider this kind of politicization, this kind of instrumentalization of Christianity by different political agendas as a sort of modern heresy. As a sort of deviation from the normalcy standards, which we can also call orthodoxy of faith. So yes, this translation was made with my approval, with my authorization.
Okay, thank you. Now, let's jump a little further. Which is the narrative of the book? The untold story that is beyond everything what is written there. I'm not interested in the details, technical details, but in the message that comes from your heart for a believer who is possible to be misleading, but about what orthodoxy really means.
Right. Well, the background story is that the book was written soon after the Russian aggression against Ukraine began in 2014, but before the fully fledged invasion that happened in February 2022. The book was written with the purpose to explain why such an aggression is possible, why aggressions like, for example, the Russian invasion to Georgia in 2008 became possible, why the wars in the Balkans, like in former Yugoslavia, became possible. I think those, or why the conflicts in the Middle East, with the involvement, like in Lebanon, for example, or in Ethiopia, where there is a war still in Tigray, and when the churches are still involved very much in the conflicts. So why all those things, all those wars and conflicts, and actually most wars, I would say all wars, they happened, well, except maybe the recent outbreak in Israel that happened in Europe in the beginning of the third millennium. They happened in the Orthodox milieu, in the Orthodox setting. So the question was for me, how this was possible, how this became possible, how Orthodoxy became a part, an instrument in those wars and conflicts. And I discovered that the roots go much further, much beyond the current time, our time. The roots go back to the centuries of Eastern Christianity, its connectedness with the state, its anamnesis, its history of being engaged in various political agendas. And I chose 3 cases to explain this story. The case of Russia, which I know pretty well, the case of Greece, which I know also well, but not as good as the Russian case, and the case of Romania, which I knew the least. That's why probably the Romanian readers would have most criticism to my fragmentary knowledge of the Romanian case, but I try to kind of to depict the paradigms, the commonalities between the different cases, and I found those commonalities between the cases. So it's like a case study to demonstrate the paradigms, the common denominators that define what we can call political orthodoxy or politicized religion.
It is possible that these political orthodoxies to be the result of the Symphonia, of the Byzantine Symphony created by Constantine and the bishops of that time?
Well, that's for sure. So it goes back to the long history of symbiosis between the church and the state in the Eastern Roman Empire. While Christianity, for most of its history, out of this long history of more than 2000 now 2000 years approximately, most time Christianity lived under the shade of the empires, in symbiosis with the empire, to the extent that sometimes the two became indistinguishable, the church and the empire. Or as one patriarch of Constantinople in the Middle Ages said, there is no church without empire. So this belief is very firmly, very deeply embedded. It sits deeply in the mentality of Eastern Christians, and even after the period of the separation between the church and the empire, the churches, Byzantine churches, still look for opportunities to re-engage with the state, to re-engage in a sort of symphony. Even in the communist period, when the symphony seemed to be impossible because the state just tried to get rid of the church, tried to create a very high wall, an impenetrable wall with the church. The church managed to find backdoors to the state, and the church collaborated. This is also the case in Romania, as it is very well known. The church has collaborated with the communist regime, with Ceausescu's regime. The church worked for Securitate, and all those stories are very well known. I don't need to retell them. But those are actually the symptoms of a sort of symphony that existed even in the Soviet times, which is a paradox. And in our times, even within EU, European Union, we could observe some attempts at symphonic relationships in the countries that are members of EU. And it's also the case, it's going to be the case in Ukraine, my own country. I'm now in Ukraine, which is about to join EU. And it's an issue for us in Ukraine, whether the church will continue practicing symphonia, in a new European setting. And certainly such countries like Romania or Greece, which are members of EU and which have like very important weight within EU, can be a good example, a paradigm for other members, like for Ukraine, how to navigate, how to to engage with the society and with the state in the European framework.
It is okay for me, let's say, as example, if I want to teach something, it is okay for me to say this. In the same time, while the church was preaching the power of the cross, she was preaching the power of the cross helped by the power of the Caesar?
Well, yes, it certainly did. The church certainly used the power of Caesar, and it happened even before Constantine, actually. It started to happen as early as the 3rd century, at least. When, for example, in some quarrels, like in Antioch, there was a quarrel between the bishops, different bishops, rival parts of Christians in Antioch who tried to claim the cathedral in Antioch for themselves, and they appealed to a pagan emperor in the 3rd century, and the emperor said, no, just it's your business, don't involve me into this. At the same time, it was observed that as early as by Origen, for example, a great Christian thinker of the pre-Constantinian era of early period, who observed that, look, the apostles actually used the infrastructure of the empire. They used the roads, and the imperial roads, which were unique this network of roads. It facilitated the spread of the gospel, so it was providential. So as early as in the times of origin, Christians started appreciating some facilities provided by the empire, and it only increased with the passage of time, and actually culminated in the time of Constantine, or soon after him. Actually, his son Constans II was really an important figure in creating this symphonic relationship between the church and the state that after that only evolved. So yes, the emperors convened the ecumenical councils. The emperors promoted the position, the doctrine of the church through imperial laws and decrees. The emperors punished heretics. I would not say that it was always like bad. It was always against the church. No, it helped the church, but the church had to pay a price. And the church always faced the risk of abuses. And such abuses happened, as for example, the most apparent abuse by the imperial power was during iconoclasm, the iconoclastic crisis, when the emperors actually forced the church to embark on iconoclastic theology. And this was regarded as a violation of the internal freedom of the church, as it were. So there were many abuses in the symphony, and actually probably I would say that there were more abuses of symphony than the good outcomes of the symphony in the history of the church. That's why I think it is very natural for the Christian church, for the Orthodox or any church, to actually appreciate, to acknowledge the benefits of the separation from the state, as we have it nowadays in the modern era. Our time is the time of separation between the church and the state. And it's not a tragedy. It's something which is to be appreciated, I believe.
Who generated this distance between church and state? The church, the state, or something else?
Well, it seems that it was always the state, but the state first initially tried to protect itself from the church, especially in the early modern West, when the church became overpowerful, too powerful and too influential, and the church and the state just was afraid of this power and tried to protect itself by distancing itself from the church. In the 20th century, we experienced also in Romania a different situation when the church actually just kicked out the state, it just got rid of the church and exercised a very radical separation, very much of violence towards the church. So it was always the state, but at the original, in the original stage and the initial stage, the state tried to protect itself from the church, and the later stage, especially in the communist time, the state tried to get rid of religion altogether.
But this means that the state became not to be Christian and secularize itself. Can you give examples of religious Christian states that rejected religion, or only secular states?
Well, I think it started actually in the wake of the 30 Years' War in Europe, in the beginning of the 17th century, soon after the Reformation. Actually, it was an outcome of the Reformation, when the idea of this Francis Bacon's idea of Leviathan, this sea monster that he compared to the state that needs to keep distance from the church. This state, in the imagination of the people in the 17th century, was not secular. It was still Christian. But people like Bacon, for example, they argue that, look, it's to the benefit of both the Christian state and the Christian church to be differentiated with one another. So originally the idea was Christian. The same was in the project of secularization as it was carried out in the United States or in Americas even before the War for Independence, and then soon after the War of Independence, when the presumably Christian state wanted a separation because there weren't too many denominations, and they actually argued with one another. They tried to exterminate each other, different denominations in different states of the United States, and the state was urged to interfere and to create this wall, constitutional wall between this, in the words of Jefferson. In France, for example, during the French Revolution, it was different because then the state declared itself to be secular, properly for the first time, and marginalized the church, tried to marginalize the church as a part of the secularizing agenda of the Enlightenment. But otherwise, well, we could say that, for example, Greek state is quite religious, even though Greek politicians are quite secular, but according to the Greek constitution, the church is not separated from the state, and yet the state creates this distance between itself and the church, which is helpful. And many people in the church actually came to appreciate this distance. Not everyone, but good theologians, I would say, they came to realize that no, it's much better for the church to have a partnership based on respect with the state than a very close alliance that resembles marriage, which often ends up in divorces or nasty arguments within the family.
You named 3 heresies that characterize a political orthodoxy: nationalism, anti-Semitism, and fundamentalism. And you took to case study for the first 2 of them, nationalism and anti-Semitism. Fundamentalism is not so in deep treated in the book, or at least it is my opinion. So can you give us some details about fundamentalism as an heresy of an political orthodoxy?
Certainly so. Well, actually, indeed, I was limited by the publisher in my explorations. That's why I explored fundamentalism elsewhere in my other writings. I specifically dedicated some articles to the issue of fundamentalism, and I believe it is really a big issue for orthodoxy, but not only for orthodoxy. It's a universal. It's actually wherever there is religion, there is always fundamentalism. Fundamentalism is something. It's a reaction of the church to modernity. It's a reaction of the church that feels that it does not play anymore the central role it used to play in the societies, in the modern societies. The church that feels threatened, that feels insecure, and essentially it's an outcome, it's a result of the church not really believing in itself. When Christians are not sure about their own belief, about their own church, about its capacity, the church's capacity to live in any society, even in secular society, then fundamentalism comes. And the fundamentalism, I believe, it's just a distortion of orthodoxy. And again, orthodoxy not just in the sense of identity, orthodoxy as it is held, by all denominations, by all churches, the normalcy, the normativity of each tradition. So fundamentalism is a distortion. It often, because the churches are insecure, they often invite political authorities to interfere. For example, the remarkable rise of fundamentalism in the Russian church opened the door to the Kremlin to interfere in the church matters. That became like a red carpet for all sorts of political figures and ideologies to come to the church and to hijack, to take the church as a hostage. It is a result of this insecurity, of this fear, of this distrust to the church. When the people don't trust the church, they believe that it's weak, it is vulnerable, it is susceptible, to the outside influence. Then they become aggressive, and they invite external powers to protect, they believe, themselves. And that's how political orthodoxy enters, takes over orthodoxy, it takes over the churches and traditions.
So we may say that fundamentalism and also the other 2 can be seen as powers that we have and use because we do not have the power of the cross and of the gospel.
Very true. So it's fundamentalism comes when there is a lack of faith and trust to God and to the church.
And his power. Okay. To find out that your orthodoxy is political can be devastating. In the same time, you may refuse to accept the reality because it is the church of God. How can a believer who is in the church, who believes in the church, who believes in God, how can he find that the church is or it is not political? How can find the real church while he's in a political orthodoxy?
Yeah. Well, it is easy and difficult simultaneously. It's easy because we have very firm beacons of truth in our churches is the gospel, the scriptures, and it's well, in Orthodoxy we have the fathers of the church, the patristic text, the text of the tradition. We have also excuse me, our liturgical text. So we have what we call the tradition. In the Protestant churches, it's more the scripture, sola scriptura. But
not exactly, because Lutheran tradition has Luther, Calvinist has Calvin,
yeah,
and the other one has something else. Yeah.
That's true.
It's not the same, but
yeah, I agree. Anyways, we have some kind of normative texts and messages, codes, as it were, textual codes, canons that can keep us afloat, can keep us away from those deviations. And just because we don't study them, it happens. That's one thing, and that is the easy part of it. The difficult part of it is who interprets those texts, who has the authority, and even the authority, interpreting authority, the magisterium, what the Catholics call magisterium, can be compromised. And then this is a real problem. When you have patriarchs preaching the war and political orthodoxy and and violence, then who can contest them? Who can argue against them? So that is the difficult part of of following your own tradition.
Yeah. Yeah, but if we take the Bible as a letter from the father to the sons and his sons and daughters, it will be simple,
Right.
at least in the beginning.
That's true.
Okay. How should be the orthodoxy? How should she act in her relations with the state in order to not be political? And I wanted to give you 2 examples. If an archbishop agrees to accept money from the state, they are legal money, but they are accessed through a politician who receives advantages, financial advantages, that money goes to his church, his diocese, let's say. So it is this political involvement, it is political orthodoxy or not. And another case, if a spiritual shepherd in Orthodoxy or Catholicism or Protestant church agrees for a politician to campaign before election in his church under the disguise of a spiritual message, but he does this in order to obtain some small favors from the politician, like a building authorization permit, for example. It is a political religion or not? Where we can trace the line between a political and non-political orthodoxy religion?
Yeah. I believe in both cases, it's not yet political orthodoxy, political religion, but it's a way to end up in a political religion. In both cases, we are dealing with plain corruption, I think, with this formula quid pro quo. I give you something and you give me something what I need. And this is corruption. But corruption is bad for the church, among other things. Corruption is bad for the church because corruption is the easiest way to end up in a sort of political theology, political orthodoxy, instrumentalization by politicians. This, for example, happened in Russia again. I want to bring back the case that I know most, the Russian church. It started with corruption, with this quid pro quo exchanges between politicians and church hierarchs, and ended up in the church completely supporting the Kremlin in its aggression, in its wars. What can be the remedy to this situation. I think you cannot isolate the church from the state or from the society, because the church is a part of the society. People who belong to the civil society, like in Romania, who vote, who participate in different public activities, political activities, they are also members of their churches. They also go on Sundays, well, most of them, to different churches. So the people are the same. You cannot separate, therefore, the church from the social body of a country. But what is needed, I already mentioned the partnership. The partnership is based on respect. When the church respects the state and the society and the principles which are important for the society, like democracy, like accountability, like transparency, and so forth, then it allows the society to flourish. Then it allows the society to respect the church as well, with all its internal principles and tenets. And then when there is respect, then there is no corruption and abuse. Because when a politician gives money to the church and the church pays back a sum of this money, commissions, as it were, fees to the politician, it's not respect. It's not based on respect. It's a very abusive relationship, I would say, on both sides. So when there is respect, such relations would be impossible, I believe. And that is something that I believe could be a very good alternative to the symphonies or to this kind of corruption that you mentioned.
In the introduction of the book, you said separation between the two was unthinkable, speaking about the time of Jesus Christ. Christ made the unthinkable a norm. Should be the same today?
Well, yeah, absolutely so. The other question is if it is still possible today. And this is not obvious. It's very difficult. And I would say that in Christianity, the reaction to the merge between the political and theological was, for example, monasticism, a very strong movement within Christianity. But even monasticism eventually was compromised with the political engagements and political agendas. Nowadays, I think it's mostly kind of conscious and responsible members of the church who can promote a reasonable distance between the church and the state. That's why theology is very much needed, because good theology is the basis. It's like an instrument that secures the partnership between the church and the state and non-abusive relations between the church and the state. So it is possible, but it's very hard, and certainly. Well, it's certainly still a theoretical possibility, I believe.
I think by this you answered my next questions. That would be, the church can repent. In fact, the church is always repenting. Can a political orthodoxy repent? But I think you answered that.
Yes, well, it is supposed to. Well, the church, political orthodoxy is a sin that needs to be confessed first and then repented. What I try to do in my book is to articulate it as a sin. Well, to confess it if you want. The next step would be to repent it in order not to repeat it again. Because repentance, it's important, because through repentance we enable ourselves to avoid in the future, not to repeat the same wrongdoings.
And a last question. It is possible that under the pressure of the request of the society for tolerance, love, lack of corruption, the church to manifest this characteristic, let's say, but only to be conform with what society is asking, not because she believes in them or not because God is asking them. How do you see this thing?
Well, that's the other side, the opposite side of this enslavement to the political agendas. I mentioned already that the respect that needs to be the foundation for the church-state relations and this relation between the church and the society. So if the state respects the society, for example, then the society is invited to respect the church with its own principles, with its own tenets, as I already mentioned. That's why the church should not dissolve in the society. The church should not become just another NGO in the society. It's important for the church to be the church, to remain the church in the society, even in a secular society, even in a society that does not comply with what the church believes, but the society needs to respect what the church believes. That is the true partnership, and the spirit of partnership should prevail over all sorts of abuses.
Thank you very much, Professor Hovorun. In behalf of those who were helped by this conversation, I want to thank him for his discussion with me about this issue. Of course, there are a lot of other things that should be addressed, but for now, it is enough.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this wonderful conversation.